Okay, so to get to their targets in the brainstem and spinal cord, so for here, the corticobulbar tract, the axons must traverse the diencephalon and go to the brainstem. So their source are the pyramidal neurons, the giant cells of Betz in the layer 5 of the cerebral cortex. And their targets are the lower motor neurons in the brainstem, which will control your face, mouth, and tongue, whereas the eyes will have a more slightly different kind of innervation. Alright, so dictum here now is just like the corticospinal tract fibers, they will cross the midline as they approach their target cranial nerve nuclei, or lower motor neurons in the brainstem. So that's the rule, they should cross. Okay, so they must cross before the nuclei for controlling the eyeballs, nuclei for controlling your jaw muscles, nuclei for controlling the facial muscles, and those that control the tongue muscles. Alright, so this is just based on Nolte's uh, illustration of the columns of the cranial nerve nuclei, and again factoring in also the journal article on the rule of force for the brainstem. So these are the lower motor neurons which control voluntary muscles here in the brainstem. The midbrain is represented here by the oculomotor and the trochlear nerves, the pons by the abducens, and the medulla by the hypoglossal nucleus. So for convention, these are the representative chambers of the cerebrospinal tract chambers. This is the cerebral aqueduct. This is the fourth ventricle. So the rule here is near the midline, beneath the floor of the fourth ventricle or of the ventricular system is where you'll find the voluntary eye, eye movements, the voluntary tongue movement controllers. Okay, not to get ahead of the motor cranial nerve nuclei lecture, which I will also give. The cranial nerve 3 basically controls all of the eyeball muscles except for the superior oblique and the lateral rectus. So your pupils, almost all of the eyeball muscles, and the eyelid muscle, the levator palpebrae superioris. Whereas the superior oblique and the lateral rectus are respectively controlled by the trochlear nerve and the abducens nerve nuclei. And to complete the picture, all the tongue muscles except the palatoglossus are controlled by the hypoglossal nucleus. So we zoom out a bit, we clear the screen so we don't get overwhelmed as we proceed to the next few slides. Okay, introducing the semi-automatic columns of gray matter, those which will control the jaw muscles via the trigeminal motor nucleus, the muscles of facial expression by the facial nucleus, the ambiguous nucleus, which in the brainstem under the microscope, this is where the cranial nerves 9 and 10 will terminate in, but you do not know which belongs to which, whether it's 9 and 10. That's why the histologists call this the nucleus ambiguous or the ambiguous nucleus. And then in the representing the spinal accessory nerve, there is actually the accessory vagus nucleus that runs from the medulla to the upper cervical cord, which controls the neck muscles. All right. So just demonstrating again here, jaw muscles for mastication, for chewing, controlled by the trigeminal motor nucleus, which the gray matter lies slightly dorsolateral to the facial nucleus over here. And the facial muscles controlled by your facial nuclei, their axons will loop around the abducens first before exiting to proceed to their target facial muscles. And then for swallowing, They are controlled by your ambiguous nucleus in the medulla, and your neck and shoulder muscles, which you'll meet again in the head and neck module, are controlled by your accessory nucleus, which ride along in the spinal accessory nerve. All right, so it will not be complete without putting the rest of the picture here, the spinal cord, because the lower motor neurons are not just found in the spinal cord, they're also found in the brainstem. I just discussed them first in the brainstem, but now we proceed to the spinal cord, where your lower motor neurons are housed within the anterior horn of the spinal cord. So, introducing this to you so you'll know it better than most, uh, even trainees in neurology, the differential location of lower motor neurons, which will control your dexterous parts of your muscles versus those which are your anti-gravity or postural muscles. So here, more medial are located the cell bodies of the neurons, which will control your trunk muscles, the dorsal muscles, because these are what you need for upright posture. Whereas the more fine controlled muscles are located laterally in the anterior horn. So they will either proceed to your upper extremity muscles or to your lower extremity muscles. Now let's talk about the crossings of the fibers. So the corticobulbar tract decussates, but it differs from the corticospinal tract in that only 50% will cross the midline to synapse on the lower motor neurons on the opposite, on the contralateral side. So if you're 50% cross, where did the other 50% go? So the other 50% proceeded ipsilaterally, meaning they did not cross. So they went to the same side, the ipsilateral side of the brainstem. So this affords a kind of backup control because the functions performed by the muscles here are quite crucial to everyday living, like chewing food or swallowing food or drinking water, things that we take for granted. All right. So, in contrast, the corticospinal tract crosses 90% of its fibers within the cervicomedullary junction. Now, you will see later that the parts of your body that require a lot of dexterity require a lot more upper motor neuron control. So, this will partly explain what we'll see in terms of the crossings of the corticobulbar versus the corticospinal tract fibers. So if 90% cross, where did the other 10% go? We'll see. So just illustrating for you. So these are the pyramids here. These are the fibers, the axons in the pyramids. As you reach the cervicomedullary junction, they will start to separate. The fibers controlling the upper extremities will cross first, and then slightly below it, the fibers controlling the lower extremities. But the targets will still be the same. They will become lateral as your lateral corticospinal tract. So someone had the time to perform this research, going to the illustrating the cervicomedullary crossing of the corticospinal tract fibers. So some fibers cross this high, those are destined for the arms, whereas those for the legs decussate just a bit lower within the cervicomedullary junction. Okay, and then the remainder, the 10% which do not cross descend uncrossed as your anterior corticospinal tract, which is conveniently near those postural anti-gravity muscles near the midline within the anterior horn, the anterior horn cells.